morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, people of LinkedIn. How are you doing? Oh, would you believe? So we are live, and my guest has literally just popped into the green room. So just bear with me a second. Good morning, Michelle. How are you
Morning.
doing? How are you doing?
I'm okay. My voice is a little bit today.
Oh no!
Apologies to you and listeners.
It's
You know,
fine. It's
nobody
gonna
needs
be
this first thing on a Friday morning. This sign at
well.
this place. But anyway,
I mean, maybe that's the vibe that we need on a Friday, right? A little bit of like husky, like it's been a long week, and we're kind of easing people into the weekend with almost like a sort of jazz club voice on a Friday morning. So that's what you're going to be getting from Machel Bogues. Good morning, everyone. I hope you've had a good week. It's been a funny one. We've had storms, we've had snow, we've had rain, we've had frost and all sorts. Michelle, apart from your voice, how's your week been this week?
it's been a good, busy but good. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Managed to mostly stay warm and
yeah,
reach the
warm.
end. Always good to reach the end of the week.
Exactly. Good morning, Andrea. Good morning. Do you know Andrea?
I do know Andrea. Morning, Andrea.
Oh, I always love it when my worlds collide in some way. Andrea Southall, who was previously at RICS and was an employee network lead. Good morning, Andrea. So good to see you. And good morning also, Adrian Aronser. And I must check with you, Michelle. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Michelle?
Yeah, Machel, that's fine. Yep.
Machel. Yeah, perfect. Amazing. We've got Adrian joining us from Cornwall, so joining us from the coast. And also, apologies, LinkedIn user, I can't see your name, but good morning, everyone. And also, good morning, Dilwyn. Good morning. Do you know Dilwyn?
I don't think so. Apologies if I do.
I only asked because Dilwyn is also RICS, so I thought you might have known.
We may have
through
met.
that connection. Yeah,
I'm a terrible memory for people's names. If I saw Dilwyn in person, I'd be like, oh, yeah. I remember this clearly.
Exactly. But, and Dilwyn is also an employee network lead. I want to say, I can't remember, Dilwyn, exactly what your network is called. So you might have to remind me, but I'm going to say, I think it's the Multicultural Network, maybe at RICS. And then good morning, Jill. Really good to see you, Jill. And also we've got Junior Beeman, one of my faves. Good morning, Oprah and friends on this frosty Friday. Junior very affectionately refers to me as Oprah, which I'll take. Junior is the multicultural lead, global multicultural lead for NatWest. And we've also got Sylvia Anna on in Cornwall as well, so on the Cornish coast. So we've got a really good representation. Really keen to see if anybody's got any questions already, because I know that this is going to be an interesting one. Obviously, we've got some questions. I've got some questions lined up for Michelle. We had a fantastic prep call yesterday, and I'm hoping that that's not why your voice is gone.
No, it isn't. I've been having a sort of cold all week, and it's just I think what happens is when I get towards the end, so this is actually a good sign in terms of everything. It means I'm fine. But it just
you've been
just
working
last
hard.
night I was like, oh, my voice is that's
it's
really
fine.
unfortunate.
We'll try to rescue it. Dilwyn, chair of the Reach Network, which in case anybody doesn't know, race, ethnicity, and cultural heritage at RICS. Perfect. Thank you so much. And everybody that's joined, let me know what the weather is where you are. Where I am, I don't know about where you are, Michelle. For me, I've actually got bright blue skies with a little bit of cloud. I've been out for my morning walk already. It's been good. How's the weather where you are, Michelle?
Where I am is actually it was grey, but it's blue now.
It's blue skies.
It looks like the sun might be peeking through.
Incredible.
Typically English way where it's going to be bright, sunny, not a cloud in the sky, but absolutely freezing. But blue skies is always good.
Blue skies, it absolutely is good. And I think we've also got Sophia Nichols there in the comments as well. Good morning, Sophia. How are you doing? Looking forward to this conversation, as am I. Sophia, I'm just hoping we've got enough time for it. So let's get into it. Everybody knows, if you've listened to this before, you know that I have a tradition of getting ChatGPT to write your bio, Machel, that I'm now going to read. And then you get to score it out of 10. So here's what ChatGPT said. You know, we have to put into work, right? Today, I'm joined by Machel Bogues. Machel is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Royal Town Planning Institute, where he leads the RTPI Change Action Plan across the planning profession and the built environment. He's also the founder of Abeng Ltd, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and has spent more than a decade designing and delivering EDI work for organisations, including the Royal Institute of British Architects, RIBA, and the National Army Museum, and supporting Parliament on Black History Month resources. Earlier in his career, he worked with the Bernie Grant Trust and as a researcher for Bernie Grant MP. Welcome, Machel.
Yeah, interesting.
How did it do? What, how much hallucination? Yes. What was the score out of 10?
I think I'm going to give it a 7 because there was some true things in there, but there's some really big omissions actually.
Okay, we'll go for it.
Not to mention my work at the Victoria Albert Museum and Science Museum. But anyway, which is where I really probably, particularly in terms of some of the stuff that I think you want to talk about, I started to cut my teeth, I guess. But yeah, so maybe that, but yeah, and probably oversold stuff with RIBA, probably. Totally honest.
Created RIBA,
and I still work with the Bernie Grant Trust, so it's not past tense. So
interesting.
Currently the chair of that trust. But,
Tell me a bit about the work that you mentioned it had missed that kind of, I guess, sort of lit your fire in this space in particular.
I mean, after Bernie died, so I worked with Bernie just before, for about 5 years before he passed. And then we set up the Bernie Grant Trust, and I was doing that for a long time. And then eventually, as one quite often has to do when one wants in the third sector, you got to look for something a bit more stable. And a job came up at the V&A. I'm a history, I guess you could say, buff. And it's what my academic training was in. So a job in a museum seemed like a really nice thing. And it was doing diversity and inclusion at the V&A. And so I did that for, I think, up 5 years, if I remember rightly. But it was a sort of big project. There's about 6 or 7 of us working on it to think about how does the V&A engage with diverse audiences.
Interesting.
We very quickly, the 6, 7 of us working on that project, came round to the idea that the typical strategy that museums employed and still do to a large extent, which is to think about specific programming. So we'll do Black History Month, or we'll have a lovely Diwali festival, or whatever the case may be, was not going to work doesn't work in the long term, because what happens is you do something that sounds really exciting. I don't know. You get a rapper in and he does something, and people come on the day and they have a really good time. And then they come back the following day and it's like, well, what's this? Yeah. It's like a different place, like a different venue. Yeah. So temporary transformations will only ever have temporary impacts. So we needed to think about what do we do over time? And so we started to really think about, well, what does the V&A hold? What are the objects it holds? And so on. And then, in and amongst all of that, so they had a policy which at the time we were there stated they do not collect objects from Africa or the Caribbean. And so we said, well, you can't engage with an audience while simultaneously telling them that we don't collect anything that might come from the cultures that you're looking to find here, or that you're trying to. And so actually we can't say we're open to everybody while simultaneously saying we're closed in other aspects. So that was the big thing, and it took us. But that policy changed. That's the big thing we did. Change, and then just as one of those things, how long does change really take? For people on the call, maybe that policy got changed in 2000, and I want to say 2005, maybe 2006. But I only think you're starting to see the implications of that policy change very recently. So very recently, the V&A appointed somebody to be a curator for African textiles, I think, if that's correct. And then they did an exhibition called African Fashion. And so, but that took a further 15, 20 years to really start to see that change manifest. So it changes glacial. We must
change is glacial. And that's a really good lesson, especially for, you know, my lovely employee network leaders on here as well, you know, because sometimes we you know, and I often, when I talk to networks, I talk about planning in quarters, and obviously most networks think in a year. A lot of this change, it is multi-year, and as you say, it is glacial. And then often, and I love what you said, you know, when you were explaining that story, because some of the things that you talked about, you know, you talked about the one-off things, you know, and I've got somebody in the comments, Junior, who talks about, I'm going to get the saying wrong, patties and pakoras. Right, as that, and those are like those one-off things, you know, and everybody's happy because, you know, all of that stuff, but actually those things are kind of like quite temporary and quite fleeting, you know. So you brought in policy, so the importance of policy and process, and then also and then also really mentioned the resources, so putting people in place to deliver.
So the reason why that change took such a long time was, I think this is the other thing we have to always remember. You can change a policy, but changing a policy doesn't really mean anything unless other things also happen. So there are other things that have to happen after a policy is changed. You have to think about the resourcing. You have to think about what happens in practice now that that policy has been adapted or changed. And changing words on a document very rarely, if ever, leads to automatically a change in the way people operate. So all of those things are, you know, you've got to get that mix completely right. And that's in the context of the V&A over that, some of those specific things. I was saying in 2005, part of the reason we got the policy changes, we were saying, I remember saying it clearly to the chief executive at that time, you can't be in a position as an institution which claims intellectual rigor to own objects, which the V&A does, despite itself, from Africa and the Caribbean, and have no curatorial expertise on it. That's a ludicrous position. Right, and everybody accepted that instantly. So they said, well, we have to change, obviously, but it took them a really long time to put everything else in place.
And sometimes it also takes, I'm guessing, some external factors. So obviously, you know, things happen in the outside world that influence. And this is, you know, the world of change it's hard and it's messy. And there are lots of different things that influence on different people. And, you know, I sometimes say it's one step forwards, two step backwards, or sometimes it's two forward, one back. Sometimes people leave and other people come, and then, you know, things progress and then they slow down and then they move forward. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But no, thank you for sharing that. And
it's fine. I see we have somebody in the chat.
Into the comments. So Ala, good morning, Ala. Thank you for joining us. As an art historian who works in corporate environment with the inclusion space, of V&A story is fascinating. And I think the arts, you know, an art historian, the arts on their own, I could do like a whole, you know, sort of series on the arts and culture as its own sort of beast. So thanks for that comment, Ala. And also, Jasmine, good morning. I also started in the arts world. I'm an anthropologist who ended up in the business world. I almost think, Jasmine, and I don't know what your views are, but I think especially with AI and all of those sorts of things, I think that the world of anthropology is becoming a lot more prominent, almost like alongside the other sciences, right? It's just my humble opinion. And good morning, Alicia, as well. Thank you for joining us. Right, we're going to delve into this topic here. This right? This is a fiery one, right? So get ready. Fasten your seatbelts, people. Multiculturalism: how place shapes belonging. I'm going to start. We're just going to go in. We're just going to go in. And the first question, we're talking about some of these terms that we've been hearing quite a lot, which is Britishness and being un-American. I mean, I've got here Americanist, but being un-Americans. We're hearing this a lot in the, you know, in sort of like popular culture at the moment. And I also want to throw in the term whiteness as a term, right? And the question that I'm asking, and I want to make it clear as well, when Machel and I had our prep call, one of the things that I said, I'm going to play devil's advocate, right? Not that the devil needs any, but I'm going to be doing that a lot this morning, right? Because I want to make sure that this isn't like an echo chamber. So let's start with this question about, you know, what we mean when we say things like British, you know, whether something is un-British or un-American. Some people feel that there is a growing discomfort around terms like, you know, un-British or Britishness or un-American, and that terms like whiteness get treated as negative by default. Do you agree with that? Do you recognize it? And how do we separate what potentially is valid critique or balanced critique with unhelpful blame? We're going in. Yeah. We're starting with a hard one.
Yes. Yeah. You know, welcome to Friday morning. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I find the idea of whiteness interesting. I didn't realize whiteness had a very fixed definition, because one of the things I find fascinating about the way identity has been played out over the, I don't know, however many centuries, is that whiteness is the thing that's never really been defined. So blackness has a very, and people understand, right? Because there's a way in which when you're fighting for yourself, you have to start, when you're trying to claim humanity, you have to state it and you have to assert it. When you're whiteness has never had to assert that, it's always been granted.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I accept that whiteness is a sort of, because I think that I don't know that that means any, I'm not sure what that really means when someone says whiteness. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So people who are white, what is whiteness?
Right.
Is it a certain, you know, what are the cultural touch points for whiteness across, in the way, you know, that we say, we might say there are cultural touch points for blackness, irrespective of where you are in the world, whether you're from the continent, directly from the Caribbean, Africa, America, wherever. I'm not sure we have those clearly marked out for.
I guess just to clarify, I guess I'm thinking about, you know, a lot of clients that I've worked with over particularly the last 5 years, where individuals, and I'll call it, and I'll say specifically white men in particular, have almost felt that their identity, you know, their whiteness as a white man is almost under attack before they literally even open their mouth. Do you know what I mean? So they come into a room, and maybe it's to have a conversation like this around inclusion, and they feel that almost by the default, the assumption is that their identity is negative, or like not the welcome identity in these sorts of conversations. Just, do you know what I mean?
I think I do. So I think there's quite a lot behind that. One is, and I think it's something we talked about tiny bit yesterday in the prep chat. One of it is a little bit weird, the way in which sometimes diversity and inclusion work gets done, and it's the lean into lived experience and whose lived experience then gets leaned into. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of something around that. But I also think there is the other part to that, and maybe the bigger part, is that there's a kind, what I do think, having said whiteness is not defined, hasn't been fully really defined, and which I don't think it has, but what I think does exist is a sort of fantastical idea around what it means to be white, that partly because it's not properly defined what that really means, anything which thinks it might be pushing back against that or trying to prick that fantasy is a problem, becomes problematic. And so you don't have a way to think about it, you know, to think about it in another way, to say, actually, what does this actually mean? And how do I engage with this without taking it as a threat? That becomes really difficult. How do you manage through that? And it becomes very difficult when if you're setting up conversations or scenarios where it's sort of a lived experience being pitted to some degree against another.
Yeah, almost like that comparison, like the oppression Olympics, right? Like, who is the most privileged or not privileged, or the most oppressed?
And it's also a difficulty, I think, that people are having, not just in this space, but around just generally, particularly these days, around understanding complexity and nuance, right? So you know, actually, you're saying those things, and suddenly I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is like when, you know, if you say somebody has privilege and they say, I don't have privilege, I grew up in a 1-bedroom council flat with, you know, 6 brothers, and my mother, you know, we ate only, I don't know, chips for dinner 5 nights a week or whatever it is. And and you have to try and explain, no. So having struggle does not mean you don't also have privilege. That's not the way that works. So I have struggle as a 6-foot black guy walking around London. I often find can find it really difficult. People don't like to sit next to me on the tube, for example. And even though there are seats and it's busy, but people don't not sit next to that guy. That happens, like all the time. But I don't worry about if I wanted to go for a run at 7 o'clock at night and it's dark. I don't think this might be dangerous for me as a man going out for a run, right? Yeah. So whereas, a white woman might think, oh, I'm not going to go for a run at 7 o'clock at night. It's too dangerous, right? And so that's a privilege I have as a man. I don't have to worry about some of those things, but I have other things that I do need to worry about. So privilege doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean.
And the context matter. Context can be situational.
And so actually having had some advantages or having had some disadvantages doesn't mean that in other aspects you've had some advantages. But that is, there is a sort of inability to think that way in a sort of nuanced. But also no, and so that's.
It is
incredibly. Those conversations really difficult, and that's what we have to try and get people to get to. Is like, okay, sure, but we're not saying that any of those things are not true. We're not saying that you haven't had struggle. We're just saying that the struggle you have had is that thing, and those are things which are, to do with things which are out of your control. Sure.
Yeah.
We're saying over here there are people who have this other struggle, and they all have it. And but it is actually something we can do something about.
It's very nuanced, and I hope that if people only take one thing away from this, I hope that one of the things that you take away is this is a nuanced conversation. So when you go back to have this conversation with colleagues, and it's one of the reasons that this is one of the ways I like to show up on LinkedIn, is because I want to create space for the nuance. Really hard to do this in posts and comments, right? So let me just get into this. So Jasmine, I think this is when we were talking about individuals feeling uncomfortable, around this assertion, this attribution around whiteness, for example. Jasmine sort of said, what's wrong with a little discomfort, especially if it nudges us to think critically. Adrian has also said here as well, whiteness hasn't necessarily needed to define itself because it's been an invisible reference point and it hasn't needed to experience itself. It's a really interesting perspective, Adrian. And then is it fair to say that to some degree, to those who have had advantage, equality feels like a threat?
Two questions there, isn't there? I mean, I would agree with Jasmine. And I think it's a bit like what you were saying at the beginning. You suggest you're going to be devil's advocate. I think echo chambers are problematic because they make you feel very comfortable and they don't push your thinking onwards. And you do need to push your thinking onwards, and some sort of putting yourself in a position which encourages you to do that, I think is always useful. And that may be uncomfortable, but you should feel that discomfort. I think I would agree with Jasmine, and I'm a big fan of that. I have said in other platforms, if we have to worry about curating the fear of the people whose change, who we need to make the change, we'll never get anywhere.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So, we can't really curate people's discomfort. They just have to feel it. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
And then there was a second question about, I think to an extent that's true, LinkedIn user, about equality and threat. But I think, I do think it's much more sort of someone who has had disadvantage in some degree, feeling like to some extent people might be trying to dismiss that experience, and that is something I do think we have to be mindful around. That actually, how do we take these conversations forward, and by acknowledging that disadvantage exists across the piece, but trying to concentrate on the ways in which systemic disadvantage can be challenged for specific groups of people, which is really what this work is. It's not about. We can't solve the problem. We're not in a position, and sadly, to solve the problems of why poor communities across the country, irrespective and what it means to live in one of those. We're here to try and make sure that where the places where we work, people can people can thrive.
Yeah. Let's I'm really enjoying the quality of the comments as well that's coming out. So please do keep, putting your thoughts, your insights, your questions. We're going to go on to complexity, because some of these topics are complex. And, something you mentioned on our prep call, Machel, was about complexity. And as you were talking about that last section there, in terms of some of the complexity and how some people may have advantage in one scenario and then disadvantage in another, right? The same individual. It made me think of, and I don't usually bring up specific political examples, but this feels appropriate. So it made me think of the whole Diane Abbott thing over the comments about individuals who are Jewish, right? And the complexity around, for example, somebody with a Jewish identity. And I say Jewish as though, that's a big umbrella, right, of ethnicities and religious perspectives and beliefs and all of that kind of thing. So we're going to get, and I just maybe want people to think about that and maybe hold, examples like that, of just an example of complexity around multiculturalism and belonging and identity. But I want to ask you about the complexity around this topic. So how do we talk honestly about difficult subjects like, for example, colonialism, empire, and harm that's potentially associated with those, while still being able to hold a more complex view of history and culture, not just as good or bad? And particularly when it comes, for example, so say we've just gone through the honours list, right? And I saw somebody wrote a post about why they would never accept an OBE. And actually they were saying that they actually feel quite affronted when they see DEI individuals accepting, like the Queen's, the King's Honours. So what are your thoughts about this? How are we able to talk about some of these difficult aspects of identity and culture, but also hold a complex view of cultures that are sometimes, again, sort of held up as being maybe all one thing or all another?
Yeah, I mean, I said this is really difficult, right? Because one, I think one of the things, particularly when it comes to the past and history and how we think about the past, we don't always, and this is across the board, we're often going back to the past to try and create a sense of who we are in the present. And so we're looking very explicitly, really, for things which validate who we think we are not as individuals, sure, but also as whatever the grouping of people might be. So whether that be nations or communities or religious groups or any kind of identity group, that any imagined community, and I don't mean that pejoratively when I say imagined community, we're always doing that. And history is really a terrible narrator of the present, right? Because history is not one. History and the people and events of the past and the people within of the past are rarely, if ever, all good or bad or whatever. There's always something that you need to really think through, but we find it really difficult to hold those contradictory things around something, or particularly someone, true at the same time. So I think one of the things we have to get much better at is having a more critical view of the past, and really developing redeveloping, because I think this is a much more recent thing, redeveloping the idea to have a more critical relationship with the past, and then and understanding that the past tells us how we got somewhere, and there are stuff that we can draw, but we can't fully understand the present just through the past. We have to also think through where we are now, and use tools from the past, but not exclusively that. So when it comes to things like colonialism, I think that means things like what we tend to see, particularly in public conversations around things like that, is a kind of split. Right? So you have the side of the story of colonialism, which is, which might try to tend towards a more balanced sheet approach, and people still talk about it, which drives me crazy. Right? And so actually it was a bad thing, but look, places have roads now, or whatever, or oh look, if it wasn't for that, would there be curries in Leicester or whatever? And it's like, okay.
net effect, net positive
kind of thing, and it's like, net positive type of thing, and it's like, oh god. And then but alongside, beyond that, or there's a kind of economic story that goes around that, which is really important to understand. And then you'll have the kind of the sort of trauma side of it, and that will be that side that comes through. Those are all true things to some degree, in the sense that, and the some degree bit replies to the balance sheet net positive stuff. The trauma stuff is all real. It's all true. It's not, there's no degrees to it. It's just, it is what happened. But there is this other stuff that did happen. And, we just have to, how do we start to tell a more complex story, not just of what that was, but what that means for where we are now. And that, the thing that I think nobody ever really talks about when it comes to that is that, we are now in 2026. 2026 looks like that precisely because of that past. That past is foundational for the way that we look now, going back to enslavement and all the way through. Not just in terms of, big power dynamics and the way the world works and the fact that there's a global south and a global north, but it is, of course, all to do with that too. It's not just, the fact that parts of Africa still operate on a cash crop economy, which is which is 100% a throwback. If you're in Kenya, it's tea or whatever. Jamaica still is a sort of sugar is its cash crop. And for people on the call who don't know this, I think it's still the case that Jamaica is a net importer of sugar, which is crazy.
Wow.
So
I never knew that my heritage.
You can. I've been to Jamaica in the past. I grew up in Jamaica, so living in Jamaica, had this experience, and visiting Jamaica had the experience of sugar being short supply in shops in Jamaica, which is crazy.
Well, maybe they just eat too much sugar.
Well, I mean, there is that, but it is, it's slightly a wild idea that you can see the sugar cane and as you driving around, but you can't find the sugar in the shops, and that. So but that again, that's a throwback to what colonial, enslavement, all that. But it's not just in all of those things. It's also in the ways in which the world works in a more sort of more person-to-person interaction level. I was talking to you yesterday. It's why England drinks tea. It's why we have a fascination in this country with cakes and tea and cakes. All of that is bound up with, it's in the music that everybody listens to, it's in the television programs that people watch. All of that is bound up in that past. So it is, that past tells the story of who we all are, not just who some of us are.
I love that.
And that is the thing that we need to really get round to talking about. It's actually that colonialism, that enslavement, the good, not that there was much of that, but
the good, the bad, the ugly.
And the ugly of it tells the story of who we all are. And if we don't start engaging with that, we're really going to struggle.
I mean, so confession time, I was never really interested in history at school, but since that I've done a lot of digging, obviously, into a lot of aspects of global history and the anthropology side. But the way that you described it there, Machel, in terms of history has kind of, we're all sort of like almost like bound up in each other's history. So even though there is space and place and all of that, and I'm going to ask you about your heritage shortly, because I think you bring a really interesting perspective. But we are all bound up in each other's history. But the thing I also love that you said at the start as well is we need to be more critical. And I think, and by that, I guess you mean like critical thinking, right? So we think critically, we look for the complexity. We don't just assume, we don't just kind of think binary about things, that's good, that's bad, etc. But looking for and understanding that complexity, I think, is so important.
We also need, by doing that, I hope we would get to a point, particularly when it comes to thinking about things like enslavement, colonialism, and where we can also, and some of the figures involved, so whether that be a Churchill or whoever else, and
or just a Wilberforce, or
someone like a Gandhi, right? So sometimes when I go on these platforms, you talk about Churchill and attacking Churchill.
Is there anybody else?
Not just people like Churchill. Churchill has some problematic aspects to his. It's out and out racist, in my opinion. But people like Mahatma Gandhi, who's also a very significant person in terms of anti-colonial movement. Nobody could deny that. I would never seek to deny it. But he also was troubling person in a lot of ways, right? So he was, you know, in the early part of his life, he lived in South Africa, and he was a supporter of apartheid, right? And he wrote to the South African government applauding them for the keeping the races apart. He thought that was a really good idea. He didn't think Indians should mix with blacks, right?
Interesting.
He may have changed his mind. I don't know that there's any I don't know that there's anything that he ever wrote that says that. But you know, I think it's fair to say he probably changed his mind. But also towards the end of his life, you know, as tests for his own sobriety, he would have, and I'm really sorry to say this at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, but he would have young women sleep with him naked to test his sobriety, and they were, I think, quite often his nieces, and so they were, and that's not what I would call you know, outstanding modern, you know, role model type behavior that I'd want to emulate by any stretch. But in terms of thinking through anti-colonial activism, non-violent protest, he's a significant figure. But these things, other things about him, are also true. So so it's just, how do we need to be able to, okay, so we can look at that. We have to accept that these things all are true. What does that mean? And hopefully that means that it means that we can take what we do need, which is valuable, right, and disconnect it, disconnect it from what was awful, and don't carry the awful forward. That's I think that's the trick, which is, I think, what doesn't happen enough. We don't agree. You know, if we go back to church, we don't do that. So it's like we think it's okay that he was racist. Right, and that's okay. Well, that becomes a problem. That does become a problem at some point.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you about your heritage. So what's your heritage, Machel? And just that's a question. I know that there's often a lot of debate about where are you from? So just for anybody that's listening, just if you're wondering about that question, the question that I tend to use is, what's your heritage? That's the question I tend to use. Personally, I'm not offended by where are you from. But I'm just putting that out there. Right? Machel.
No, it's fine.
And then we're going to get to deal with this question.
I spent the first 13 years of my life in Jamaica. So I was born there and I went to school there, and then I came here. So I would just say, anybody asks me, I would say I'm Jamaican, and that's kind of the end of the conversation. Because that's how I see myself. All right, you know, I definitely see myself as a Jamaican ported into Babylon and forced to stay here. Against his will.
I'm not long enough to explain the term Babylon.
But the slightly more complex story is that my mother's side of the family is from South Africa. So that and they left South Africa they were involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and they left South Africa in the 60s and were exiled into London, and then through complex movements and a range of horrible leaders, basically my mother went first to Uganda, and then was forced to leave Uganda with Idi Amin's when Idi Amin took over. Well, I don't know, forced is probably too strong, was advised to leave, probably better. Advised to leave when Idi Amin was kicking people out and so on. And that found herself in Jamaica to complete she was doing some PhD work looking at nutrition and the benefits of breastfeeding, if I remember rightly. And then she found herself in Jamaica as the next best site for her study, and met my dad, and that's how that happened. So I sort of say that's, you know, I'm Jamaican, that's the end of this, in many ways the end of the story, but I also wouldn't exist without things like apartheid and Idi Amin, which is a kind of uncomfortable thought, but that's the way the world works, right? That's just the way the world works.
Absolutely. Especially, you know, I didn't realize that we shared like some Jamaican heritage, but part of my heritage is, you know, my great grandmother, who was born in Jamaica, actually, you know, on a plantation owned by Robert Beckford, who was a very famous plantation owner. But my grandmother was, you know, very mixed kind of heritage, part Syrian, a little bit of Scottish, a little, you know, all of those things. together. So yeah, these complex histories when it comes to multicultural. But obviously, people just look at me now and see a brown woman with curly hair, right?
Yeah.
So Dilwyn, I wanted to get onto your question specifically because I think it's a really interesting question, and I love the comments in the discussion in the comments around comfortable versus uncomfortable. So let's get into this. I agree that you cannot please everyone, but how do we bring those who are uncomfortable? So I'm maybe uncomfortable about this sorts of conversation along with us in the journey. I mean, hopefully, Dilwyn, I think some of the language that Machel has used already, hopefully you find interesting. So how do we bring those who are uncomfortable with these sorts of conversations, or maybe hold a very different view along with us on the journey, especially when we need these people to adapt these changes or come on the journey with us? Your thoughts on that, Machel?
I don't know. I don't know how. I'm not feeling very. I'm not feeling very.
Very great.
I'm feeling quite militant this morning, I guess, in some ways, right? So, and when I'm feeling quite militant, I quite often say that I don't know that we do need to bring them with us, do we?
Well, maybe there's a lesson in that, isn't there? Because I think there are some days, a bit like you. So, I have been unusually irritable this week. Actually, I've been, because there's a lot of stuff going on. Sometimes that is how life is, and so some days I am not up for a conversation. Sometimes I'm not up for allowing people the grace that my work sometimes demands of me, right? And then other days I am, and I can come to it with the nuance and the meeting people where they are and all of that. But sometimes we do have to recognize, and almost like I want to say like our own limits, if that makes sense, Dilwyn. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you'd agree with that, Machel.
No, we do always have to recognize our own limits, right? We do, 100%. No, I think I am feeling quite militant today, but I actually do say this all the time, even when I'm not feeling very militant, particularly in a question of change. So change, if we think about change as a process, there's quite a long way. There's quite a lot of things that one needs to do that. So this is a bit of a tortured metaphor, but I apologize, and I so apologize already. But it's, if you think about the change is going to be taking a train. It's a train journey from A to B. That's going to happen, right? Because change means being different, doing different. So we're going to be different. Otherwise, it's not change. So we're going to go from point A to point B. In the build up to this train journey, I'm going to be super helpful. I will help you as much as I can. I will ask as many questions. You can ask me as many questions. I will support you in any way that seems reasonable and feasible. I will provide you with all the directions. I will tell you the time the train leaves. I will help you pack your bags. I will buy you the ticket. I will help you to get on the train. I will even put your bags away for you. What I cannot do is put you on the train. And when that train's ready to go, it's gonna go. And it will be your choice as to whether or not you're on that train or not. And so if you're on the train, fantastic. And there will be refreshments and there will be and everything. But if you're not on the train, that's up to you. But I can't. But the change, if we're saying the change has to happen, then I'm afraid we also have to accept that sometimes that change will happen and we will not have been able to bring everybody with us.
Absolutely.
And that is okay.
I see what I would throw into the mix as well, Machel, just to kind of add on to what you were saying, because one of the things that I've seen specific to networks as well, actually, one of the things that I've seen, in fact, I've got an invite in my inbox for, so I know the Tesco Race Ethnicity Network. I know they have been running a book club, I want to say for it's easily 6 years or something, like consistently, and it's a they've invited me to a couple, and it's a really, I mean, especially if it's fiction as well. I'm just going to add that in. I'm not a big lover of fiction myself, but when it comes to talking about difficult topics, like for example delving into history, somebody's lived experience, what does that thing mean? What is sometimes when you do it through fiction, it can be really, really useful because it takes up some of the emotion out of it, and it's a really good learning opportunity. And book clubs, I know some people sort of scoff at book clubs and they think, oh, that's like a middle class solution to something, right? But it creates it creates a container for conversations. And actually, the thing that I would say about topics like this is I'd actually kind of say, wait till you get to know somebody a little bit more, if that makes it. Get to know them like just on a human level first, right? Just talk about the weather and what stuff that's going on at work. Just get to know them as well as possible, within the context of your workplace, before you then start to broach some of these kind of like trickier topics. Like, don't, if you know somebody maybe isn't on the train, don't just lead with this. Like, don't just corner them in the office and be like, what do you think of this? Just get to know them first, like literally on a human level. Like, go to, if there's a works deal or whatever, go there and just have a chat with them about their family. And what, a lot of us have so much more in common when it comes to just humanity, family, views about like right and wrong and all of those sorts of things. It's just, don't even get me started on social media, but there is a perception that there is more division actually than there is, I think, and that there is a perception that we are more different actually than we are, right? And the reality is, when you break it down to what makes us human and what people care about, there is more in common than there is difference. Okay. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay. But I think this is where, I think we have an anthropologist by training and the thing.
Yeah.
And anthropology is doing a lot of work around this.
Yeah.
And, the actual lack of genetic difference between
Absolutely.
people. So I can't, this is not the exact thing, but it is something like there is more genetic diversity within a Bedouin tribe in Northern Africa than there is between people in Turkey and Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, right? I can believe it.
And that is, which is a kind of historical fact based on where human life started, which is consensus, is a continent of Africa, and then moves out. And that and actually outside of Africa, they reckon it's around 10,000 people populated over the rest of the world. So all the most of the genetic diversity in the world is held within the continent of Africa. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, it's good. It's all good. It's all good. When we talk about belonging, and we're in like multicultural workplaces and societies, etc. And I was talking about, obviously I'm originally from Birmingham, right? So very multicultural. It's called one of these like super diverse cities. What role does place play? And we're coming off the back of the flags and all that malarkey, right? What role do things like that, so flags, place, the place that it's interesting, and obviously we talked a little bit about our heritage. So what role does, things like flag and just the place that we're in, what role does that play in our identity? And what is kind of going on with that at the moment?
Well, I think our relationship with space and identity is very, I said imagine communities, which is a sort of very academic thing, but they're no less real just because they don't necessarily have physical things attached to them. But you create those physical attachments by looking at what's around you, and then those spaces can reinforce whatever that imagination is. And so the challenge becomes, when you're thinking about public art, like if it's a Colson statue, for example, or flags, is those things become symbolic of a very specific understanding of what that identity is, and it's not always the case, but can feel like it can feel territorial in a way, like when we're marking this is our space, and we're marking it with these flags, or we're marking it with whatever else it might be. But there are ways to do that where it feels like slightly more less inclusive. So I do think that relationship between what we think of ourselves and how we feel about ourselves, and how we try to relate that onto the spaces where we're actually physically moving through is really very, very important. And it's why if you're just thinking about a workplace, how easy is it? How our ability to move through that workspace comfortably physically is really important for how much we enjoy being in that place. But equally, if you hate the place you work, if you hate your job and you do not like the people you work with and you find them really difficult, they have, because they're always doing bants or whatever, or then actually it doesn't matter how nice the building is, it will be a horrible place to step in step into. So those things are some of those things are real, and some of those things are, as in, they're sort of physical, and some of those things are what they are more the symbolism. I think it comes back to thinking through, how do we create, in sort of bigger context, if we're thinking about a city, how do we think about more types of people more frequently, so that we can create, why not have ramps instead of steps, just for argument's sake, right? Nobody, I don't think there's anybody who cannot use a ramp, right? So ramps work for everybody, whether you're walking on two legs, or whether you're pushing a pushchair, whether or not you're in a wheelchair, ramps work. So let's just have ramps instead of steps, for example, right? As a sort of, and that would mean as the default, because steps is the default, or has been the default, because it's been designed around a specific type of user. So if we think about actually what is the way in which we can think about the space which will work, which is, and make the default what works for almost everybody, in as many, then make that the default, then that will make us substantially change the way space feels and plays, and who operates in those spaces. So I know there's been some really interesting stuff that's happened, thinking about the concept of safety and what it means, and particularly in terms of planning women's spaces and so on. I got the Jenny Savage was a woman who brought this to my attention. Anyway, she did a lot of work at Tower Hamlets around there. Anyway, the idea is that actually, when we're thinking about planning for women's safety, what we tend to think about is more lights and wider walkways and stuff like that. What this piece of work was saying was, actually, it's about multi-occupancy. It's about lots of different people using the space simultaneously, because what makes somebody feel unsafe might be a group of teenage boys grouped together looking threatening. Right. That group of boys is grouped together looking threatening because they think they may be under threat from another group of boys, right, who may enter the space. So you look threatening to protect yourself from potential attack, right? But by looking threatening, you're right. So actually, the safety means thinking not just, oh, how do we have more lights so women can see? It means thinking, how do we create the space so that people in that space know everybody feels safe, and and therefore there is no perceived threat, and that you get that by saying, actually, multiple occupancy, different generations all moving through would really help with that. Right. So there's a sort of this kind of interrelationship between the teenage boys' safety and safety. It's really interesting. Really interesting. The way that you explained it there in terms of, I guess, particularly the ramp and the stairs, like, which, anybody that's obviously working in accessibility work that's listening to this is like, that's like an obvious, but there is just something about, how do we make the default in terms of our spaces and places just as inclusive to everyone? Like, the default becomes that it's inclusive, then that will, that will make it a place where you feel like you belong, right? If the default is welcoming, because if the default isn't, then it's problematic, right? I mean, I'm fortunate enough to walk around on 2 feet. I have done my whole life. I don't think I've ever encountered a ramp and thought, oh God, that's annoying. Ramp. I really wish it was stairs. I don't feel included. I don't think anyone would feel like that. I would just think, oh yeah, okay, it's a ramp. And then, in fact, when I was a kid, I loved ramps because we'd go roller skating on the ramps. It was great. And the default, then, when I think about, for example, multiculturalism, and then there's some brilliant comments in the comments. Kate, your point here about you were at the Army's Multicultural Conference, and they had historians talking about the history of different regiments, the Gurkhas, etc. And all that work that, like, Joanna Lumley was doing and all of that stuff. Wouldn't it be great in workplaces if workplaces, I mean, I've worked in some great buildings that had a lot of history, and even if the buildings were new, they often brought
a little bit of the history of the old buildings. And I've been in workplaces where there was either a coffee table book or there was artwork on the walls that maybe told the history of the company. Wouldn't it be great if, so to whoever's listening to this, the next time you go into your office, right? Just pull up that point so I don't forget it. The next time you go into your office, if you have walls like that are charting the history of the company or whatever, just maybe look at how inclusive that is. Bearing in mind what we've been talking about and Machel's point around the complexity of history and how different cultures have actually intertwined in this global village that we all live in, right? I think it's really interesting. Let's just pick up this point here. I don't think that ramps are universally positive. Please explain, LinkedIn user in the comments. Love that. This is not
sure they're not, but the point about it wasn't
being
so much ramps are genuinely they're necessarily a good thing in and of themselves. It's more that actually, if we put steps, obviously exclude people or make life more difficult for people who have mobility issues or are going to be pushing pushchairs around. So if we put those people at the forefront of when we're planning, it will automatically change the way the space feels for and it will change the way the space feels for everybody, and probably for the better. But
so it's probably worth adding that I think to your point as well, caller, it's contextual, right? It's not going to be, as we were saying before, so let's take our own medicine in terms of not just applying the binary thinking now of like, that's now the solution to everything.
No, they're not. If we're all, I think we're all probably to some degree involved in this wonderful world of DEI, and so I'm sure we've all worked out by now, even if we've only been doing it for six days, that there isn't a silver bullet. So there's never going to be a single action that will solve.
There isn't a silver bullet. It's very easy to get cancelled. That's what I know.
Yeah.
Let's we're going to go on to just this last question here. We've covered quite a lot, but disordered discourse was a phrase that you used, Machel, in our conversation. What do you mean by that? And what role does it play when we are discussing topics like multiculturalism and belonging and identity? Disordered discourse. You heard it here first, folks.
Well, and feel free to repeat it. It'd be interesting to see whether or not I can get a hashtag going.
Copyright it.
It was my reflections on how do we describe the times we're in. And I was interested in something alliterative. I don't know why. That always seems nice in my head. But I and across the whether it's DI or elsewhere, but across the when I'm looking out around the world and what's happening, I'm struck by the way in which people are speaking. So the discourse people are having. For good or for ill, mostly for ill, and the kind of chaotic nature of it, I guess, and the sort of increasingly, it's been like this for a while, I think, but increasingly the selective nature of the evidence selected or chosen around which to build whatever discourse is happening, and this dismissal of any other type of evidence. So evidence to the contrary just doesn't matter. Just doesn't matter. I show you something, you say X, I say no, but look at Y, and you say doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. And also there's even a worse sort of approach around it, which is, well, you can't prove that what I said isn't right.
So even if you can, because I'll say, no, here's the evidence that says that you're wrong. You will say, someone, not you personally, but someone will say, doesn't matter. Well, what you've shown me doesn't matter. And and flippantly, I use, because then I showed it's. I think it surprised you yesterday to understand that there was a sort of community of people across the world who believe the world is flat. But that is.
I thought you were being ironic.
No.
You were being ironic. If you show them a picture, so they will say, and this is why this is sort of there's a really good, I think a good explanation of what I mean. So if they will say the world is flat, prove it's not flat, show me a picture.
And you'll say, okay, cool. And you show them a picture. They say, that's a fake picture.
I mean,
so you've got this argument has nowhere to go.
No.
Because
to be
the
honest,
proof you've asked for, I provide, you dismiss. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, that point, that example, that I feel like that sums up our times, right? The fact that it's 2026 and people believe that the earth is flat.
Yeah.
That sums up the size of the problem, my friends.
And so, and they think everything you see that comes from space has been made by CGI, despite the fact that CGI, postdates space travel. Right. So anyway, so it's that's sort of what I mean. And so what but there is, so there is a discourse around that.
Yeah.
But there's no order to it because it's completely chaotic. Yeah. So it's become it is a disordered discourse. And then I also like the idea that a disorder is a kind of mental break. And I do think that some of the stuff that we're seeing, not so much the flat earth stuff, which is it's mildly amusing, a little bit worrying, but mostly mildly amusing. But some of the other stuff is really problematic. So some of the stuff, when we're hearing people like Stephen Miller talk about 19th century American imperialism and having that come back, and might is right, and throwing back to that time, even make America great again, reform, etc. All of that stuff feels to me to be sitting within this kind of, there's a discourse, but it's very disordered, it's very, very chaotic, and it's at its center is some sort of fantasy around something.
What is the antidote? And to anybody that's got a drop, in terms of the recording, so the post that you saw will be the recording, or you can find it on YouTube. I will drop a link after this, the recording. What is the antidote to disordered discourse?
No, this is this I'm afraid. I suppose. I mean,
don't say
whether or not this is a correct diagnosis or not. I think what I would say is I've reached a kind of, I've got a diagnosis. I don't know I don't know if I have a treatment plan. I do think part of it is actually, in the bigger picture, thinking about Farages and the Trumps and the Weathers, there is something in there about the lack of ability to understand the past in a complex and nuanced way, and trying to bring that idea of the past into the present, right? So in a way which is, completely misunderstands the ways of the forces of history work. It is impossible to go back. So, but anyway, that's the attempt. So I think part of it is about, it's difficult. Part of it's it's because it's fantasy. It's an idea. So I think it is about saying, how do we position a better idea?
Yeah.
And how do we do it in a way that will actually land with people?
Yeah.
And we have to think that through really, 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 really carefully.
Absolutely. And hence why I kind of think the thing about getting to know people is really important, because otherwise you just fall out about this. You get into, and I want to leave people with a few book recommendations, and we're gonna wrap things up. I promise we're gonna wrap things up, because we all have somewhere to be, right? I'm almost running late, and I'm gonna ask Machel for his one thing that he wants people to take away before we finish. But I'm going to leave a few book recommendations. Some, if anybody's heard me talk about books and you're in this work, you've probably heard me mention this one before. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. Because I think what that does is it gets into the science of irrationality, as in why people think what they think, even when there's no facts. Right, it kind of sets that up really, really well. So if you want to understand why do the left think a certain way and why do the right think a certain way, it is framed very sort of American. Really, really good book. So I think if you're in this work, you definitely need to read that. The other one I'm going to want to mention is Don't Talk About Politics by Sarah Stein Lubrano. I want to say Sarah Stein Lubrano. I am planning to get her on here. And that does give a little bit more advice actually about how to talk about these things and why trying to solve these things on social media generally does not work. Right? She talks about that. She talks about the importance of third spaces, actually, Machel, like in the public sphere, which is something maybe I'll get you back on to talk about that. And then the final thing I wanted to leave people with about different ways of thinking is Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. If you haven't come across it, it's a more systematic way of working through problems, discussions, etc. But in the context of this, like you were saying, Machel, if somebody has beliefs that are based on non-fact, or at least non-commonly accepted fact, it's almost impossible.
Fantasy is very you can't beat fantasy with logic. So that's my no.
The other thing is you sometimes need an influencer, so somebody that they look up to that maybe thinks differently. That's one of the ways that Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book. Like, how do you persuade somebody that believes something like random? And he talks about what that cycle can look like, but it's very difficult. Machel, what's the last thing that you want?
Can I throw another book in?
Yeah, sure. Okay? Yeah, always love a book recommendation.
People in the chat have talked about history, and I've talked about it. And so there's a book called Silencing the Past by Haitian. I'm sure it's Haitian anthropologist / historian. Sadly passed away now, but Michael Trulio, if I remember how to say it. But
try to remember to link these books in the comments, folks.
Yeah, it's really the book for understanding the sort of ways and the sort of production of history with the Haitian Revolution at its center.
Yeah,
really, it's particularly the first chapter. I think anybody would be if you're interested in the production of history and how what happens and how things from the past get silenced.
Fantastic. Good morning, Leighton Campbell. Love this disordered discourse narrative. Honestly, Leighton, it was when I heard it, I was like, all the lights went off for me. Leighton Campbell last year ran the UK's first International Men's Day conference. Congratulations again, Leighton, giving you flowers for sure. What's one thing that you want to leave people with?
I feel like I may have not, I think I might have made some people that there's no hope on it. But the thing I would say is, no, actually, it's difficult, but there is always potential for change. And but I think we just need to. I think one of the key messages for me, particularly in DI spaces, there's always potential for change. It is tough. It might be slow, but we must. But we need to be okay with that change not being for everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if there are people for whom the change is going to be too much and they don't want to do it, I think we have to be able to accept. Accept that.
Yeah, and maybe at different times, going back to your train analogy, maybe they're not going to get on the train you're on. Maybe they're going to get on the next one.
Maybe they're going to get on a different train somewhere else.
The example you gave of the VNA at the top of the conversation, like, look how long that took them to finally sort of put the steps in place, right? These systems were not built overnight, and they're not going to be changed overnight either. That's the reality of it, right? Thank you, Machel. Thank you so much. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where do you tend to kind of hang out and give your thoughts and your perspectives?
I'm absolutely awful poster of things, so
it's fine. I'm the same, honestly.
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and
LinkedIn.
No, I am there. Yeah. And I do respond. I mean, I'm not the quickest, but I am on LinkedIn. I do respond in eventually on LinkedIn.
Okay.
It won't take me 6 months, but it might not be 6 hours.
Yeah. But you're not a prolific sort of,
I'm not really. No, I don't have that particular character trait.
I'm the same.
Compels me to tell everybody what I'm doing in the moment that I'm doing it. I'm slightly envious of the people who do that.
No, I'm the same, but it's because I actually have a love-hate relationship with social media at the moment. I'm almost bordering on a conscientious objector, but that's for another. And here I am talking on social media, but that's for another conversation. Machel, thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thanks for everybody and apologies if my voice was a bit.
No, it's absolutely fine. And do you know what?
Tad late joining, apologies.
No, and do you know what? And I have to give a shout out to Celia as well, who found you, because she's been bringing me some amazing guests. And to be, if I'm being honest, this is a difficult topic which really needed somebody that knew what they were talking about. and you knew what you were talking about.
I did my best, is what I was saying. Maybe you'll find somebody who really knows what they're talking about next time.
You know, I'll be like, that Machel. Yeah. And honestly, thank you, everybody in the comments, especially those of you that have literally been with us through the whole conversation. Andrea, I saw your comment about setting up the book club. I used to run a book club. Maybe we will see. Well, I don't know. I just don't know if I've had the time. I'm actually looking to join somebody else's book club. So if somebody sets one up, I will be there. But thank you all, honestly, in the comments for your insights and your questions, etc. And I really hope that this has inspired you to do a bit more of the work, you know, in terms of like the history and the complexity, because I think it's fascinating. I'm definitely going to be diving into that book that you mentioned, Machel, but also hope that it's given you a little bit more confidence around some of these difficult conversations potentially that you're having in workplaces. And that's it. And I'm, you know, that's it. Just to say thank you and go with grace. So everybody have a great weekend. Machel, thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Thanks, everybody.